Hello, the topic of this presentation is multilingualism and language education policy in France. In my presentation, I will be specifically delving into language education policy and its impact on migrant multilingual students. First, I will guide you through an introduction to the topic where I will conceptualize language education policy in France and discuss the significance of the topic. In my review of literature, I will be exploring three major themes which influence education policy and its impact on migrant students. The first is the historical background for language education policy in France, and here I will be making some connections to functionalist education theory that we've discussed in our course. The second theme that we'll explore is the current state of language policies in France and the apparent influence of globalization in determining which languages are valued and taught. The third theme will explore the implications of language education policy for multilingual migrant students in France. And then I will conclude by discussing future areas of research related to this topic and lingering questions about language education policy. Some of the key terms that I will be using throughout the presentation include monolingual, bilingual, multilingual, and migrant. The literature often uses multilingual to describe migrant students, although sometimes bilingual as well. I will be using multilingual as an umbrella term to encompass both scenarios. Another key term throughout the presentation is migrant, which we will be viewing as someone who has immigrated to France, typically for work or for asylum. The context for the research is that France has a growing population of students in primary school from migrant families who speak one or more languages other than French at home. And French is the language of instruction and used as a tool by the state for integration and assimilation. So we're going to be looking at sort of the juxtaposition of the two and how they function and do not function together. This is a topic that's being explored in several countries as there's an ever-increasing flow of people across borders. In fact, a lot of the literature that I reviewed compared language education approaches of different countries with regard to their migrant student populations. One of the major institutions that serves people when they enter a new country is the school. So this is typically a major conveyor of the language, values, and skills that are necessary to survive in that given country. How a country approaches immigration and language learning through school can have a significant impact on how a migrant student views school and consequently the dominant culture of the nation state in which they're living. What is really compelling about this topic is that in France, languages that migrant students bring with them to school as a linguistic asset are being viewed more as a hindrance to learning rather than being celebrated and used to help them further understand the world and to process information. So with language being so closely tied to culture, the omission of policies and practices related to migrant languages suggests the marginalization of these populations in the school setting. The research questions explored are what are the linguistic barriers to integration in French society for migrant students, and how does language policy and ideology impact access to and the quality of education for migrant students? My thesis that I will use to guide the discussion of the research is that education policy related to the education of teaching and the second language acquisition in French primary schools creates an atmosphere where French and second languages that are offered are privileged over migrant languages. So as we move through the literature review, I want to just review the lens and context that we'll be using to discuss this thesis. The first is the approach to education in France and how the French language specifically plays into that purpose. Then we'll explore the current second language acquisition policy in France and why certain languages are taught. And finally, we'll look at how migrant languages fit into this system and how do the first two themes contribute to the deficit mindset that's typically used to approach migrant students and their home languages. So, what is the French context and what makes France so different from other countries? So, as Christine Hello and André Young point out, France, because of its constitution, has developed an assimilationist model of integration with ideals of equality for all citizens sharing the same language and the same culture. This assimilationist model is designed to absorb immigrants in the dominant language and culture of the nation state. French is officially the national language of schooling and of the Republic. The single language policy was also designed to unify France, which has historically been a country with many regional languages. So, making French the national language of education effectively has downplayed the significance of regional and also immigrant languages. And one of the ways that France upholds this Republican ideal of égalité, or equality, is by not differentiating on the grounds of religion, ethnicity, or language. So Garcia points out that the principle of equality for all pupils can be interpreted as a duty to disregard difference, equating equality with uniformity. So for this reason, oftentimes data might not be collected in schools on migrant students and their home languages, and data on their home languages, what language they speak at home, since this is a factor that would differentiate them from other students. So teachers then really might not know what languages their students speak. The idea, again, behind this policy is, and behind having this single language of French, is that it will help unify the country and promote equality and contribute to the idea of one indivisible nation state. So again, Hello and Young point out that this is one of the reasons behind the reluctance to refer to minorities and minority languages in France, just to refer to them in general. Because it's assumed that once you come and you are in France and going to school, that you are now a part of the French nation state and are becoming French. Jimenez Salcedo highlights as well that citizenship is really at the root of this monolingual and assimilationist model. So going on the idea of citizenship and language uniformity as a basis for creating equality in schools, there's a strong connection between how France views the role of the school as a citizen maker and unifier, and then the functionalist theories that we have explored in our course. So functionalists see the role of school as an institution which provides for the survival of and perpetuation of a democratic nation. The French see the school as one that instills French ideals, culture, and language in pupils and ultimately develops French citizens. Feinberg and Soltis highlight the roles that schools play in society, in social solidarity and socialization. They also purport that students learn the acceptable norms of a society at school. I would venture to say that where functionalists see a hidden curriculum, though, or one that's meant to develop students as citizens in a given country, that role in France is fairly overt and clearly understood by educators as being one of their roles. So now that we've situated the role of French language in creating French citizens, let's look at how the French approach second language acquisition in schools. So in the primary schools in France, languages that are theoretically taught other than French or offered are noted as modern foreign languages, regional languages, and languages of origin. So languages of origin generally reflect languages of historical immigrants to France, such as Arabic, Turkish, Portuguese, Italian. Regional languages are seen as historical languages from within France, such as Alsatian or Provençal. And modern foreign languages represent languages of major European powers, such as English and German. Some languages have switched status, so to speak, from that immigrant category to the modern foreign languages, such as Italian or Spanish, as those countries have developed in economic capacity and Europe has developed as a supranational state. In the policies which provide for language teaching in the primary schools, there's a perceived hierarchy among the languages and among these categories. So language of origin, for example, are optional. And generally have to be taught by a teacher that is not at the school. So another teacher has to come and teach them. Whereas foreign languages are compulsory. So Elo and Young point out that this classification system reflects the different status of languages and creates an inbuilt hierarchy and rivalry. And in reality, there's a lack of choice for children at the primary level. So English is what is typically taught. There's also a difference in how languages are perceived in terms of their purpose. So modern languages are seen to have economic, social, and cultural value, whereas languages of origin have typically, when they have been offered with the intention that students are going to return to their country of origin. And so the implication here could be seen that some languages are useful to the Republic and some are not as valuable. So in thinking about the French language policy through the lens of globalization, the French have largely emphasized a language policy which, to quote Smythe, is directed by political objectives in international relations, such as trade, diplomacy, and foreign affairs. Smythe further asserts that the political agenda allocates a disproportionate amount of time and space to a limited selection of languages. Language learning is no longer a subject with a solely educational value, but rather is meant to connect students with this other global body of language speakers, such as English speakers. So by emphasizing these languages, there's an inherent understanding here that some communities of languages are ones that the French do not wish to participate in. So what are the implications of the French approach to French as the sole language of instruction, and then the focus of foreign language instruction, which is reserved for certain languages such as English and German? Andrea Young asks the question, integration at school is largely dependent upon learning the language of the school, but does this mean that other languages cannot play a part in the learning and integration process? So it appears that several educators in France see that the multilingualism that migrant students bring to school, they see it as a hindrance in their learning. There seems to be a pervasive belief that languages other than French should not be spoken at school, outside of a foreign language class. So as teachers who were interviewed by Young pointed out, using French at school is meant to help students integrate, socialize with all students, and prevents them from excluding others. So effectively, they are asked to leave their home language at the door. This sends the message that French is ultimately more important than the language that they speak at home. And the other downside to this belief system and to the overall policy of ignoring the unique linguistic capabilities of these students are that they're bringing to school is that it's also potentially exposing them to neglect in terms of their linguistic needs. And not only are they not getting overt language support in some cases, so for example, when they enter school, if they have not been speaking French at home, if they've been speaking another language and they have to then learn French at school, they're not always receiving that, explicit language support. So not only are they not getting that, but the fact that some students may need to process ideas in multiple languages is not really being addressed or supported. So the fundamental idea about learning is that we as humans learn by making connections to what we already know. So if the cultural and linguistic background that migrant children are bringing with them to school is being ignored, then it stands to reason that maybe they are not, maybe how they are being taught is not effective. Another idea that is explored in the research is the idea that bilingualism or multilingualism is an obstacle to student learning in French schools. It's seen through a deficit point of view. So rather than being valued for their linguistic capabilities, students are being seen as having a problem. Here I'm going to pause because I'm going to need to make another video, so I will continue in the second video.